Hi everybody and welcome to Creativity Reframed. Joining me this week we have a very interesting, multifaceted lady. I have with me today Dr. Melissa Sterry, and she, amongst many things, is a design scientist, systems theorist who specialises in sustainable futures. So who better than to be joining me today than somebody with such a kind of an eclectic perspective on the world that we inhabit. So first off, Melissa, thank you so much for joining me today. It's an absolute pleasure. You're joining us from France through the powers of technology. So the question I ask everybody right at the start is, of course, how has this period of change affected you as both a female leader and perhaps on a personal level?
Well, I think there's really been two things. As an event, it's been really interesting in that I've been studying major disruptive events of this general kind for a long time, but it's obviously one thing to consider an event in the abstract and another to see it unfolding around you. So that's been interesting. And what that's really made me aware of is the fact that although I'm fascinated at the intellectual level, so, you know, it's every facet of the pandemic is something I can think about, I can be engaged with intellectually in a very dynamic way, but then emotionally my experience of it has been not unlike that of many people, in that it is frankly horrendous in some respects, in that it really makes you aware of how much you miss people, how much you miss certain things. I guess the flip side of that is it makes you realize just how much you value certain things. So for me there's been that sort of juxtaposition of those sort of heart versus head response to the event. And then also it's been interesting in that, like a lot of folks that are essentially working independently, and that particularly have worked with digital for a long time, I've been working outside of the office context, except for when I'm going into a client or a very specific activity, for pretty much, well, since the early noughties, for what is now coming up for 20 plus years. So in a sense, the kind of working from home thing for me is, if that's my natural territory, it's more natural for me to be either working from home or some other place than in an office. But it's been interesting to see how other people have adapted, and really to sort of see the shift in that, there was a time not so long ago when, I had, some friends and some associates that imagined that, if you're not doing an office job, it's not a proper job. It's like the sort of, the 60s pop stars that say, well, my mum and dad are still waiting for me to get a proper job. But now we've seen that transition. So, everyone has been working from home, or pretty much the majority of society. So it's been interesting to see that shift, and to really kind of see the dynamic unfolding, and how that's impacted the world of work and people's lives more generally.
Sure. And it, as again, something we're keen to look at through this series is that kind of female leadership lens. So during everything that's happened, how have you been able to kind of channel your own creativity and problem solving to kind of positive effect?
Well, I think I was fortunate in the sense that because I'm a folio professional and I have different things going on, I was able to shape shift things around. So I was able, for example, to put the emphasis on, for example, with my research, I couldn't go out and do field research, because I couldn't even at some points go up the road, let alone, go to another country. So I shifted the emphasis to publishing, and to basically translating some of the more academic work into formats suitable for, a wide audience, what you might call pop science. And with my corporate work, I shifted the emphasis more to consulting, because although, I do a lot of keynotes, and the obvious thing would have been to do a lot of digital keynotes. But what I realized is that although I enjoy doing some keynotes, and in some ways it's great to do online keynotes because you can engage a global audience across time zones. But another thing I really realized in the pandemic was that it is such a different experience to be delivering a talk online to in person. And it's really important to me to be in the room, to see everyone's faces, to have that dialogue, and to pick up on the non-verbal signals. And I hadn't really realized how important that was to me before, but actually, when the pandemic came along and I was forced to, as we all were, engage with the world from a screen, it made me realize just how important that in-person experiences, and the fact that even when you're giving a keynote, you're actually in a conversation, because if you can see that you're losing the room, then you shift it up. You either add more detail, or you make it less technical, or you do whatever you have to do, and so that everyone is with you on that journey, and then you'll also engage them, and that's so much harder online. So it's actually, for me, it's been a big sort of insight into human relationships, and really what it is that makes the conversation work optimally, rather than being in a situation where you've got so many parameters within strict limits that it's actually difficult to have that dialogue.
Mm-hmm. And it's kind of, I was kind of really interested in that kind of that notion of shape shifting, which I think is really interesting. And as you talked about at the start, Melissa, one of the things that's been a hallmark of your career for a long time has actually been that flexibility, hybrid working. So, you were trailblazing that, I guess, many years ago. When you then talked about how actually you kind of moved perhaps more into a writing zone, was that something that you felt kind of quite nourishing, perhaps through the experience of being able to kind of maybe be more focused and kind of do more of the writing? Was that part of it?
I think I naturally like to shift things up for at a certain point. So I don't have a very low boredom threshold, in the sense that my attention isn't lost from a subject, in an instant. But I do get bored if I'm in a very if I'm pursuing a constant goal, as it were, in a very particular way for a sustained period. So I naturally kind of shift up everything I'm doing, and writing is great, yes, for crystallizing your thoughts, for also, particularly because I wasn't doing so much academic. I mean, I did do a couple of pieces that were more academic in that period, but because I was doing pieces that essentially were dealing with problems that I'd already solved, I'd already worked through, but I was thinking about how you communicate those in a different way. It was quite a creative process, because at the level of creative writing, obviously you have to think about switching up your terminology, your language, using a lot more analogies, metaphors, and so forth. So yeah, it was a creative process, and again, just it was very much embedded in relations and how we think and experience things. And I think probably at the human level, something that has actually been a very constant theme in my research and my writing for a long time, has been the different ways in which people perceive of things, the underlying psychology and cognition behind that. And one of the things that I always find difficult is, we've lived in a period of immense polarity, when we've seen extremes in politics, we've seen people being pitted against each other, and clash, even in the pandemic, and the media is very much played into this, and if you like, exasperated a problem. And I think, like a lot of people, for me, that's uncomfortable, because although I realize that the dynamism and the dialogue is critical, on the other hand, it's difficult seeing these arguments going on, and especially when we've got huge problems that need to be tackled with some expediency, and our capacity to come together and to agree on things has been tested. But I think what this event has really made me think about is, how we reconcile those differences, and just how important it is to create more conversations where actually you're not necessarily very comfortable. You might actually be horrified by the other person's view, but you find a way to have that conversation, because unless that exchange happens, we can't move out of the situation we're in right now.
Sure. And kind of slightly changing tact, Melissa, one of the things that we're exploring through this series is really a celebration of, and there have been, of course, very well documented examples of brilliant female leadership, particularly through the last 18 months or so. Is there anyone in particular that is a kind of shining beacon for you of a female that's done an incredible job during this difficult period?
Goodness me. Well, I think the fact that a number of the vaccine teams were led, very female-led. Women are within and of the sciences. There are some domains where there are fewer women. For example, historically, it would be physics. And there are others where women are very prominent, and there are a lot of absolutely brilliant female scientists, not just in one field, but across many fields. And biology and the life sciences are one of those fields. And so it wasn't in any way surprising that there were a lot of absolutely brilliant women on the vaccine teams, but it's fantastic to see them getting the recognition. And also what I really liked about the female leadership within and of that domain is just how humble and the way that they acknowledge their peers. And I think that is one thing that women do, because we all of us know, whatever your discipline, you will have come up, particularly if you've kind of risen up against, or you've kind of climbed up the career ladder against the resistance that is inherent in it. Just how many challenges, just how much of a task it is to navigate all of the different things that are thrown at us, all of the different things we're expected to be, all of the sort of the contradictions in that. And so I think there was a camaraderie, there was an innate support, and it wasn't about sort of kind of dismissing the role of men, because obviously men have played a fundamental and a critical part in not just the development of the vaccines, but in science and the world more generally. But it was about just acknowledging, there are many brilliant women, and in this case, that they've contributed to something that is helping us out of a really big challenge. So that for me was quite a special moment.
Yeah, I agree, actually. And because obviously I think the vaccination programme has been live and running for so long now, I think it's actually a really good reminder of the role of women in the mix of all of that, actually, because I remember at the time, it was very evident in terms of the role that women have played. But yeah, I think it's a really good reminder that, of the role that we played. Shifting tact again, and possibly a world, Melissa, that I know that you work with kind of corporates within that portfolio that you have, but thinking about the world of kind of marketing and brand. But again, I know that you'll certainly have a point of view on this as well. Just curious to understand, what role you think that kind of creative marketing and brand has played during the pandemic. Is there anything that's caught your attention there?
I think that we've seen some great comms. What I would say is, I think initially the comms of this were quite challenging for the domain of marketing and communications more generally, because although there are immense talents and there are many techniques and tools you can use, I think that community, like us all, were looking at this and slightly taken aback by it, really. And I think initially, although we saw some good work, we didn't see as much as we needed to see. What I think has actually happened is as with digital, it's highlighted not only the need, but really the sort of the scope of possibilities that are at our disposal. And because we've sort of, I see this as a practice run. I mean, although this pandemic, it may be the first in major pandemic that certainly we've had in the global north, as far as the contagions that can be spread through the air are concerned. This is one of what are in effect a number of likely pandemics this century. All of the sort of the indicators that suggest the probabilities of pandemics are showing a very high probability of not one class of pandemics, but a number. So I can't see this as a test run, and I hope that what has happened is that the community has, it's had a bit of a trial and error period, and it's now, if you like, comfortable with the nature of the brief, and that if, as I think very likely to happen at some point in the next 15 to 20 years, another pandemic, possibly even one that in some ways is more challenging than this one, emerges, I'd like to think that this period has prepared the community, and for other types of very similar hazard, because obviously pandemics are just one of a big class of what technically this is a socio-ecological challenge, in that this is part nature, this is part human action, and I hope it's sort of brought that out, as well as really, I think generally the fact that the event has made people think a lot more deeply about not only their life and their work, but about the world more generally, and about some of the facts, that some of the things that mean that, we're paying a big price for many of the things that make our lives very convenient. So for example, if we hadn't have had such global connectivity, then we wouldn't have seen this pandemic take off as quickly as it did. It would have patchy, but then again, we need that connectivity. So, you know, actually kind of digging into that and just sort of thinking more deeply, because when we're aware of the problem, we actually tend to be quite good at pioneering solutions. So it's not the problem
Yes.
itself that's the issue, it's the surprise factor. It's that we're not, you know, we haven't been ready for it. But that when we are, we're like, boom, we're on it. We're, you know, we're generating solutions.
Yeah. And kind of final question then, Melissa, which kind of segues nicely out of this, really. And it's lovely to end with a note of optimism, is what are your hopes for us all off the back of this experience as we come through the other side? Whatever the other side looks like, of course.
Well, I really hope that we see continued flexibility in the workplace, and more autonomy in the way that people are allowed to engage in the workplace. So I hope that we see, I mean, I think there is a place for the office and the home in that scenario. And obviously there are some jobs that necessitate very particular facilities and therefore can't be done in the home. But I hope that we see that continued. I hope that we see more understanding of how, in effect, unequal the setup was, and how for those that had the means to you know, work from home relatively easily, you know, it was a relatively small step, and that, you know, if you had a quiet space in your home and you had a bunch of office equipment and you maybe either didn't have children, or you had a partner, or you had someone that was there to help you with the childcare, you know, you had a comparatively easy run of it. Whereas obviously if you lived in an overcrowded house with nowhere quiet and no equipment and so forth, it was a much harder proposition for you. So I hope we've seen more understanding of that, because I think the nature of the problems, they're not unique to the pandemic. They're things that we all face more generally. So I think we need, you know, an open conversation about that, to think about that very creatively. And yeah, in the workplace to recognize, I mean, we've had a lot of talk about, you know, the raising of awareness that you don't need to be present to necessarily contribute productively to a project. And I think that's absolutely true. And indeed, there are some tasks that actually can be done better remotely. So for example, if I'm, you know, working with a team and it's all about educating the team, or it's all about you know, looking at a forward trajectory for a company, and thinking about the dynamics of that, then actually that problem is typically better solved by me being with that team in a physical place. But then writing, my productivity for writing, you know, goes right down the toilet if I'm in a very busy place, because I can't concentrate on a really technical problem with distraction. So I think the biggest sort of step for the workplace would be a recognition that there are, you know, different ways to crack a nut, and that we need all of those different ways engaged. They all have the pros and the cons, but if we bring them into the mix, if we recognize you know, what works, what doesn't, then I think we'll be in a much better place. And that, I think, is the most practically big step that we could take, because I think there's a lot of hype around what could come out the back of this, but actually a lot of the things that have been flagged as being new, or as being you know, in some way unique to this event, actually they're not things that you know, are new to the radar. But that, I think, we had a big test run on this. We had a way to do something differently, and I hope at the back of it we do things a bit differently, but also recognize, as I said, you know, with the public speaking, there are some things that have to be done in a more traditional way. So
yes,
trying to get the balance, I think.
Absolutely. It's all about vive la différence, I guess. And it's interesting because I wholeheartedly agree. Our organisation is now completely hybrid. So, you know, for me, you know, perfect kind of blend of physical working and exactly that piece where whenever I come into the office to spend time with my team, it's to do the more team orientated, getting to know each other. But exactly to your point, that then it's horses for courses. And when I'm at home, I'm working in a completely different way, and I'm often writing or, you know, doing something with spreadsheets, which is very kind of intensive. And I think as you say, that flexible working piece has to be a really, really positive outcome coming through the other side of this. So well, listen, we are done, Melissa. Thank you so much for your time, and for a very different perspective, actually, because quite often we speak to lots of marketers. So I think it's been really really illuminating to get perhaps a slightly more scientific and perhaps a bit more of an academic perspective on some of these topics. So thank you so much for your time, and take care.